Hello, welcome to a new HostiFi video. My name's Alex, and today we're going to look at Grade Nat on Starlink. So we've published a few blog posts on the HostiFi blog about Starlink and how it works, and Riley has even got Starlink installed at his house. So Riley's done a blog post on Starlink as well. On the HostiFi blog, we've got a blog post discussing what Grade Nat is, the different types of ways that ISP get public IPs to you, and then each one in detail, so static public IP addresses, Cgnat, got Starlink and Grade Nat, and then some information about HostiFi. So we're going to discuss what Grade Nat is to start with. So usually with a normal ISP, the ISP gives you either a public IP address that's static, so you either request a static IP address from them, and that gives you a lot of flexibility. You can port forward, you can do a VPN back to your home network if you need to access services that you've got. You can host stuff. You can even some ISPs will even give you multiple public IP addresses to have. So if you're a business, you could have a block of 10 IP addresses, for example. You could host a Windows server on one public IP. You could have a web server, another one, an email server, that sort of thing. So some businesses will actually go and host email themselves rather than use a public service like Google Workplace, for example. The other one is dynamic public IP addresses. So most consumer ISPs, so if you've got a consumer account like a home account with an ISP, you'll have a public IP, but you won't have a static assigned one. So if you reboot your router, for example, you'll notice that the public IP address might change from time to time. That's because the ISP has a pool of public IPs for a set amount of users. So it means that if your router gets switched off for a period of time, that public IP is not wasted because IPv4 addresses are quite scarce at the moment. Until we move to IPv6, that's going to be the case. So once you register online, usually this is by PPPoE, the ISP will push down a new public IP to you. You'll have that for a set amount of time. And as soon as you reset the session or get the router gets restarted, you'll get a new public IP, and that will get sort of swapped around and repurposed if needed. So that's the static public IP addresses and the dynamic public IP addresses. Next is Grade Nat. So with smaller ISPs that find it difficult to get a huge allocation of IP4 addresses, that ISP can use something called Cgnat. So what it's essentially doing is pushing another layer of NAT further up the chain. So typically with a home setup, you'll have public IP on your router, and a layer of NAT will be the devices behind that. So your phone, your laptop, or your Chromecast, for example. However, with Grade Nat, it pushes the level of NAT one level up. So you can see on my little diagram here, each customer's router has got a different IPv4 address, but this time it's a 172 address, which is part of the private IP range. Typically, the public IP will be on those devices, and you have the NAT inside. And however, now the public IP is at the ISP, and the local router to your area now has the Grade Nat that it's pushing out. So just pushing another layer, but that does have some problems. So Starlink, for example, uses Grade Nat, and we'll get to that section in a minute. While Grade Nat helps prevent IPv exhaustion without the need to switch over yet to IPv6, there are quite a few downsides. Number one is that port forwarding doesn't work. So the complete out of question, VPNs might have some issues, and Xbox Live will have some issues as well. That's not a blanket rule, but sometimes it can cause problems. It also has the problem of IP reputation. So public IP addresses have reputation based on spam lists, and if someone does something dodgy with the public IP, like send a spam email or hack something, that IP gains a bad reputation, and therefore everyone under that one IP address is going to have problems. Now Starlink uses Grade Nat. It's a very good way of getting mass connectivity very quickly out without having to allocate a public IP to everyone. It also, Grade Nat will also enable the use of DHCP. So typically if you're using DHCP with an ISP, they're not handing out public IP addresses, they're handing out Grade Nat IP addresses. If you're using PPPoE or static IP allocation, and then you're more than likely using a public IP address. So Starlink uses Cgnat to avoid the need for thousands of IPv4 addresses, and this could create quite a huge issue if they did have to do that based on how people use Starlink. So if they did if they did static IP allocation for everyone on Starlink, some people don't even use the Starlink dish all the time. It's more of an emergency device. It's in WAN failover mode. It might just be turned off because it uses a lot of power. So handing out a public IP address to every single person is not really feasible. The dynamic IP situation again might be more difficult because it's not using DHCP. It's using DHCP, and PPPoE will be a headache to manage for Starlink. So carrier grade NAT is the best of both worlds. So using carrier grade NAT on Starlink sort of offers a okay compromise. Generally, people on Starlink are going to be using it for emergency situations, or because they have no other choice, if that makes sense. So if you're in the middle of nowhere, up on the hills, and you've got no internet, no cell coverage, and you just need some internet, Starlink is a very good choice for that, and you're not going to mind not having port forwarding if you're in the middle of nowhere. Also for WAN, some people use it for WAN failover, so as a secondary WAN, so if you've got a fiber connection to your house, you could have Starlink as a failover, and you wouldn't really notice any speed issues, but you'll have issues with NAT. You'll have problems with services that require a strict amount of NAT level. However, late last year, some users on Reddit noticed that they were starting to get a rooted IPv4 address, but not everyone has seen this, and there's no word on it since that comment. So that's an overview of what Cgnat is, and in Starlink as well, and how dynamic public IP addresses and how static IP public addresses work. Hopefully that's been very helpful in understanding what it is. You can find out more information about Starlink at HostiFi.com/blog. We've got a few guides on the blog discussing what different things are, as well as a lot of new posts looking at new software releases for Unify, new hardware, and new guides. So Evan has published a guide on how to configure WireGuard on the Edge router. You can find the link to this blog post in the description below, and you can find out more about HostiFi at HostiFi.com, and contact us at support@HostiFi.com. You can also follow HostiFi on Twitter at HostiFi_net, where you can see all the latest information. Thank you for watching this video. My name's Alex, and we'll see you again next time.